King Midas, in his younger days, as you probably know, had been an awfully greedy man. So much so he had asked for the infamous blessing that every single thing he should touch should turn to gold. And he had lived with this for months. Everything he had touched had turned to gold. The bed sheets had touched, he had turned to gold, and made them awfully uncomfortable and exceedingly heavy to sleep under. The food he picked up and tried to put to his lips turned to gold, such that he had got thinner and thinner and thinner and very nearly starved to death. Even when he would pick up a cup of something to drink, not only would the cup itself turn to gold, not a problem, but the liquid within would turn solid to gold, and so he had almost died of thirst. Even when he had sought to embrace his daughter and his loved ones, his friends, his family, they had turned to gold. He had become the kind of man who, as St. Oscar of Wilde said, knew the price of everything and the value of nothing. Until eventually, on the brink of dying of starvation and thirst, lonely and isolated and cut off from all those around him, he'd prayed to the gods for release from this curse which he had brought upon himself with his own foolishness. And the gods in their infinite compassion took pity upon him and told him to go and wash his hands in the holy river and dissipate this magical touch, such that that river to this very day now has traces of the golden power of Midas within it, with little flecks of gold along the length of its river bed. Now, this story begins where that story ends, for having become utterly sickened by his own greed, his own materialism, in which he saw every single thing around him become nothing but wealth. Cold, heavy, burdensome wealth. Midas, now free of the curse, decided he would retire to the country, as many a city banker and stock market trader has done in recent years, once they've finally glutted themselves on the avarice of all of that trader and trading and dealing and so forth. They've retired to the country life to hunt and shoot and fish and ride horses. And there was Midas doing pretty much just that, and enjoying his life, when his own foolishness once again brought him into trouble. For having gone to the country, he had decided he would fully embrace the rural lifestyle. No longer for him the gods of the city, no longer Athena and Apollo and Aphrodite. For him, the lord of the country became the ruler of his heart, of his soul. To mighty Pan he bent his knee. Before Pan he poured libations. To Pan he burnt incense. To Pan he prayed and made his sublimations. And Pan listened, as Pan always does. And one day, Pan was entertaining Midas, one of his favourite new followers, favourite new converts, with the strings, the panpipes. He was filling the glades and the mountainside with the most beautiful of music. Not the lofty songs sung in Athens and the great cities, but with the somewhat bawdy and lustful songs sung by shepherds and farmers and country folk around their campfires as they swigged their Retsina. But Midas, who had had enough of city life, loved it, and said to Pan, "This music is better than anything I heard in the city. This music is perfect. It lifts my soul. Indeed, you are a greater musician than any of those I heard back when I lived in my palace." And Pan, stroking his horns, said aloud, mused aloud, Perhaps I am greater even in my music than handsome Apollo is when he plucks upon the lyre." Well, Apollo is everywhere. The light of the sun reaches everywhere. You may think that sunlight is nothing but a few photons jiggling around in a rather overexcited fashion. But those photons are thinking and feeling photons. They are the very flesh and blood and essence of Apollo himself. And so the light coalesced in front of Pan, in front of Midas, and there stood Apollo. And Apollo said, "You think you're better than me at music? You with your pipes cut from old reeds, held together by a bit of wax and string, think you are better than me as I pluck upon the strings of my lyre, fashioned with gold and silver and inlaid with rubies and diamonds and sapphires and emeralds." And all the while Midas listened to this and thought how much like himself, or at least his old self, that sounded. To value the glamorous, the golden, the expensive, the ornate, the cerebral, the high-blown, the cultured, instead of valuing the simplicity of those reed pipes held together by wax and by string, and the bawdy songs they played of love and laughter and joy. "Well," said Apollo, "I challenge you to a contest. A musical contest. You play your pipes, I will play my lyre, and we will have a judge listen to both and decide who is indeed the greater musician of the two of us. Who shall we have?" Well, Pan, perhaps a little sneakily, a little cunningly, pointed to Midas. But Apollo realised that Midas was devoted to the great god Pan, and so favoured a more neutral judge, and they looked about them and they looked up at the great mountain. And Apollo and Pan alike called to Midas, the god, the very spirit, the very essence of the mountain. And Midas came down the mountainside, came down flowing like a great spirit, which he was, and said to these two gods, the god of the forests and the fields and the god of the cities and the sunlight, "What is it that you require of me?" And so Apollo and Pan between them explained what was required of mighty Midas, slow-moving and eternal. And Midas thought ever so slowly, for thinking and saying anything in the language of mountains takes longer than a conversation in old Intish. And at length Midas said, "I will listen, and I will judge." And so Pan began to play a lilt upon his pipe, such a beautiful lilt that Midas was up and dancing and spiralling and turning. The flowers were swaying, the branches of the trees were groaning in harmony. All of nature rejoiced at the song of Pan, as his hooves spun and spun and spun, and the light reflected off his horns. And when Pan was finished entertaining the heart and soul of the land around him, and even old Midas slowly began to rock in tune with the music, his ancient stone foot tapping out a beat. Even as Midas joined in, the song ended. And Apollo said, not bad for country folk. Now, listen to the tune upon the harp of the god of light." And so He played and he played and he played and he played such songs as would make the sun itself weep. Beautiful and ethereal and uplifting, serene and tranquil and inspiring. And when he had finished and the last note died upon the winds, Molus raised with infinite slowness his stone hand, in which he held a flower, to give to the winner, and his hand moved towards Apollo, and he said, "You, Lord of the Light, are greatest." And Apollo, with a tremendous smile upon his face, swaggered. Of course, it was known before even I began to play. And poor Pan looked crestfallen. And Midas, seeing how crestfallen his god looked, said, "I do not think that judgment was fair, for the music of Pan was wonderful, it was ecstatic. It is the music of my soul, the music of my new life in this rustic environment. Not, beautiful though it may be, not the music of the cities that you, Apollo, play." And Apollo looked upon him with wrath and said, "You must have the ears of a donkey to so favour the music of these backwards rustics. You have forgotten your soul and your calling and your birth. You have forgotten your status and your station in life." And with that, Apollo dissipated back upon the light and returned to far distant Olympus. And Midas's ears began to grow and grow and grow until there extended from the side of his head 2 great donkey's ears, flapping and furry in the breeze. Well, Midas was heartbroken, for although he had gone for the simple life, he still had a certain vanity of the city dweller, the wish to be respectable, the wish to be handsome, the wish to be admired, not to be laughed at, not to be mocked, but to be looked up to. And so he went home in a terrible state, back to his villa. For when I say he had given up money, I mean that in the same way that city bankers give up money. They still live like kings, just not like emperors. So Midas returned to his villa, and there he sought amongst his wardrobe, and he found a great length of purple cloth. And this he wrapped around and around and around his head, much like a turban, to create this great covering that would hide his donkey ears. And in this fashion he lived for many a long year. And come the days, after a few months, when he would need his hair cut, he would have it cut completely in private, just himself and the servant who acted as barber. No other servants present, no relative present, no friend present, as was more common in that day that having your hair cut, much like having your hair cut today, you go to a barber, a hairdresser, and it's a social event. But he didn't want anyone to see what was underneath his great purple turban, except of course the barber who had to see. And the barber, under pain of death, was sworn to absolute secrecy. One whisper, one word, and his throat would be slit from ear to ear. Donkey's ear to donkey's ear, you might say. Well, when the turban came off, the scissors came out and the hair was trimmed and snipped, and then the turban wrapped back round again. But the thing is, a secret, like a good tune, is hard to keep to yourself. You start wanting to hum it, you start wanting to sing it, and even if, like me, you sound like a cat falling down a lift shaft when you try to sing, nonetheless, it bubbles up from within, it wants to come out, and the barber was desperate to tell someone why Midas wore this bizarre headdress unlike anybody else in ancient Greece at the time. But he knew that if he told one person, they would tell another, who would tell another, who would tell another, and soon rumour would get back to Midas, and then... And so, bursting with the urge to tell, bubbling over with it, he went out of the village. He went out mile upon mile upon mile upon mile until he came to a far bend in the river, where there was a meadow. And he had brought with him a small shovel, and he dug a hole in the meadow. And he stuck his head into the hole, and in that hole he whispered, "Midas has donkey's ears." And then he quickly filled the hole in with the soil and rushed off back, sighing with relief. Like when you finally get to the loo after having your legs crossed for an awfully long time, that sense of, back to his life. But what the poor barber didn't realise was that the soil he had turfed back into the meadow had captured seeds from the reed plants swaying at the sides of the river. And as he had whispered the secret into the hole and filled the hot soil back into the hole, the seeds had heard the secret. No human had, but the seeds had. And so the seeds, over time, began to grow and grow and grow until reeds filled that patch of meadow. And as the reeds swayed, in the wind, the susurrations of the wind would whisper, "Midas has the ears of a donkey." And it is said that when Pan came to make himself a new syrinx, a new set of pipes, he cut those reeds from that particular meadow, and when first he began to play, the music that came out, no longer a whisper but a joyful cry, was, "Midas has the ears of a donkey." It echoed the length and breadth of Greece. And then Midas, when everyone knew, did not have the barber's throat slit, because by then, what would have been the point? Instead, he took off the turban and unwrapped it and lived the remainder of his sorry and unwise life, no longer pretending not to have the ears of a donkey, but admitting that he did.